face from them. And why did he hide his face from them? Does it mean like we think of, where if somebody does me wrong, well, they're going to go stand in the corner, I'm going to hide their face from me because I don't want to look upon them? Is that what it means? Listen, hid his face is not talking about literally like he left them, like he exit stage left, like we think of it. It's talking about God. It's not talking about God rejecting or abandoning us. It's figurative language talking about the law given to Moses at Sinai. It's analogous to the law and the tabernacle given to Moses. That's what it means that he hid his face. It's analogous to the law given from Mount Sinai and the tabernacle that God gave to Moses to fashion, the earthly tabernacle. Listen, in the law and in the tabernacle that God had Moses fashion, there's something called the Holy of Holies, or the holiest place, isn't there?
Yep.
Isn't that the place where the presence of God was?
Yep.
Isn't that the place where his face was? Isn't that the place that represented being intimate with God? Isn't that the place that represented where you would be standing face to face with God and you could see his face? Isn't that the place that represented you being in his presence and you having intimacy with him? That's the place that it represented, guys. It represented being intimate with God. It represented knowing God in the biblical sense. I hate to say it that way, but it's just the way it is. When it talks about knowing God, listen, we don't want to think of God like a human and think of like some sexual act. But knowing God, meaning I'm intimate with him through his spirit and we become one. That's what the holiest place in the tabernacle represented. Okay? It represented being able to know God. It represented being able to be intimate with God. It represented being able to stand face to face with him and stand in his presence. But in the earthly tabernacle, guess what there was outside of the holiest place? A veil. And so his face was hidden to them. His face was hidden to them in the tabernacle because nobody could enter into the holiest place except for one man, and that was once a year, and that was the high priest. And so what is God telling us when he says he hid his face from us? He's talking about the law. The law reveals God's face hidden through the veil. The veil isn't God wanting to keep man away from him. The veil is man's sin-stained conscience keeping man from intimacy with God. The veil is representing man's fornication with the flesh, and man's fornication with the flesh keeping him from intimacy with God. That's what the veil is representing. That's why it says that when Jesus died, the veil was torn in two. That's why Hebrews talks about the veil being removed through our sin-stained conscience being washed with the blood.